What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck on 3, coming to you on Sunday, December 1st, 2024, as number one Oregon defeats Washington 49-21 in Eugene on Saturday night to complete the regular season at 12-0. Joining me to break it all down is Scoop Duck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, good morning.
Good morning. Glad to wake up. Having a good Sunday morning so far, and the Ducks are 12-0.
The Ducks are 12-0, man. It is quite a season that they are having. It was a dominant performance, really from start to finish on Saturday in Eugene. The game was never in question. The Ducks defensive line logged 10 sacks on Damon Williams Jr., the Huskies quarterback, tying a single game program record. Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele were leading the way in what was a just party in the backfield. I don't know what else you can call it, Justin, but it was a phenomenal performance from the Ducks. Dan Lanning gets his first win against the Huskies as Oregon's head coach. There's a lot we can get into here, but they're going to be going to the Big Ten championship game next weekend against Penn State. And I mean, things are rolling for the Ducks. So I'm just stoked for all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I could probably sit here and do a whole pod, just on the football game, just on the season, just on, the chaos that was yesterday. I mean, obviously Miami losing, obviously Ohio State losing, which every one of us expected it to be a rematch of Oregon and Ohio State. And voila, here we are. We're looking at Penn State and Oregon now, which is an intriguing matchup. So just a wild Saturday. And, I don't know about you, but I know for me, sitting there watching those games and tailgating a little bit, and then sitting there, I'm like, well, shoot, I think Oregon's going to beat the hell out of Washington, but look at these upsets. Like, that's why they play these rivalry games. Like, maybe I need to be a little bit more concerned. But, obviously Dan Lanning had the guys ready. And like you said, they, pretty much hit the ground running. That first drive was surgical. It was perfect. It was balanced. It was, and for whatever reason, they kind of got away from it for the next drive or two. But then obviously, Will Stein figured out, I'm going to go back to what was working. And like you said, the game was never really in question, but Oregon really, laid it on them. And, good news is there was a sign of life in the third quarter for what feels like the first time this year. So that was refreshing as well.
Yeah, that was one of my takeaways from the game was that the Ducks had a strong third quarter, probably their best third quarter of the year. And it sounds funny saying that because they only scored 7 points, but did the defense continue to dominate? When I was looking it up, doing my research last night in the stats, Washington gained 15 yards of total offense the whole quarter, which is phenomenal. And they stopped Washington on that first drive coming out of the half, forced a punt, and then Tez Johnson got that touchdown in the corner of the end zone. So they really kind of converted that momentum. That's always my thing with Oregon that I kind of get concerned about sometimes, particularly when they start the game with the ball. All right, so if you start the game with the ball, you got to go down and put up points. And I feel like there's been some times where they haven't done that this year. So they really got things off to a great start offensively. The offensive line looked great, Justin. They looked like they were, running with some more pep in their step. That's certainly a group that needed that bye week coming off of that grueling win over Wisconsin out in the heart of Big Ten country. So I didn't have a lot of concern necessarily that Oregon wasn't going to be able to get it done. I know they've had their issues with Washington and anything goes in a rivalry. The only thing that really kind of gave me okay, let's see how this goes was seeing Damon Williams' legs, because that dude can run and he is not easy to bring down when he gets moving in the pocket. I remember I first saw him when I went out to Arizona to cover Luke Moga, the Oregon quarterback, when he was coming out of high school, and I stopped by Basha and got to see Damon Williams, and then he just balled out in the All-American Bowl last year. So I knew he was a talented guy, but it definitely felt like a tough ask for him to get his first college start against the number one team in the country and probably the best defensive line in college football right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tall order. That's kind of throwing your feet into the fire. And, that was one of the things I posted in the Gamer, in the first quarter, was that, hey, I hope that Oregon goes into the half here and makes those adjustments, because that was really the entire Washington offense was Williams beating them with his legs. And a funny side story, if you weren't at the game, Don Essig, obviously, who does call the game for Oregon in the stadium, called him Desmond Williams. I'm pretty sure for the entire first quarter, and then somewhere along the way, I think somebody nudged him and said, "Hey, it's Demon Williams. It's not Desmond." So, kind of a funny side story. We all make mistakes, so I'm not picking on him. It was just kind of a great atmosphere. I thought, it was 40 degrees or just below 40 degrees. It was cold, but everybody showed up, and you could tell that there was a lot of energy. I was completely surprised. I mean, utterly surprised at how few Washington fans there were in the stadium. Normally, you look up in the corner and there's a sea of purple, and then it's scattered around. I mean, there was barely any up in the visitor section, and the scattering around the stadium was very sparse. So, pretty surprising to see how few Washington fans traveled for this one. I guess maybe it's kind of indicative of their season. Obviously, hasn't gone the way they all wanted it to, and I think certainly they weren't wanting to finish it against Oregon in number one. But yeah, I love the adjustments they made there. And that kid, like you said, he's really good with his feet, but obviously got a long ways to go learning how to throw the ball a little bit better.
Getting into some of the other standouts on the night, Justin, not a crazy game from Dylan Gabriel necessarily. 16 for 23, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air. And then he also contributed 3 carries for 20 yards and a touchdown on the ground. But I feel like some of his runs were just really good. Like he had that third down run where he rolled around the side of the pocket and then kind of tiptoed up the sideline to move the chains. And that's really, I think, all you can ask for from your quarterback. He clearly doesn't run very often, but when he does, it always feels like it's at the right time on those designed runs. And he's a guy who's not going to put himself in harm's way too much. And that just speaks to his feel for the game and his kind of football savvy. But couple other notes. We saw Tez Johnson come back from his injury, so caught all 3 of his targets for 36 yards and a touchdown. And even though it wasn't a crazy statistical game, you could tell, Justin, that his return impacted that defense and just what they had to be ready for. And I think that's a great sign for Oregon and just where they're at right now as an offense. Terrence Ferguson caught his 15th receiving touchdown, tying in with Josh Wilcox for the most in Oregon program history. So everything looks like it's rolling pretty well for the offense right now. Noah Whittington was another guy that didn't do a ton, but I was really encouraged just to see him running with some juice in his legs. He looked like he was really comfortable out there.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice that you didn't need an exceptional performance from Dylan Gabriel to win the game. It was just, hey, let's manage the offense, okay? Run it a few times here and there, and he made really smart choices there and got the ball out pretty quick, when he needed to. It was just a very clean game from Dylan Gabriel. I will say this, man, Jordan James was running pissed off again yesterday. Like that, I mean, you could see the game. And again, I mentioned that opening drive. That was a Jordan James drive. Then they went with Whittington, I think, the next 2 drives. He wasn't very effective in that first half or first quarter, whatever you will. Noah Whittington in the second half, I agree with you, was just, it looked like he kind of got out there. I don't know if he did some smelling salts or what, but you could see he got that burst back. It was like, oh, there's Noah Whittington. But first half, Jordan James was lights out. And like you said, it's not just the balls that Tez Johnson catches that helps the offense. It's the fact that when he's out there, it changes the dynamic and frees up for a guy like Trayshawn Holden or Evan Stewart or whoever it might be. He creates those opportunities for those guys. Obviously, we saw the big play from Holden as well. And I think that was a byproduct of Tez Johnson returning. So, ironically enough, was asked by the Penn State insider from On3 this morning, like, hey, what does Oregon do well? Because obviously they haven't, followed Oregon a whole lot this season, didn't play each other. It's like, hey, what do we expect from Oregon? And, the cliff notes for me were, hey, look, the offense is balanced, right? They are able to run the ball. They can do the intermediate pass and they can do the deep pass. It's a really tough offense to stop when it's working. And we saw that on the opening drive and then some of the later drives as well. And then I just simply said the defensive line is a unit. Like, get ready. You guys probably will have a tough time running the football on Oregon. So you're going to probably need your receivers and whatnot to make some plays. It's a really strong defense, but they really don't let you run the ball very well. So those were the cliff notes ahead of Penn State, which we'll get into. But I think that all obviously was showcased Saturday night against Washington as well.
talking about the run defense, Justin, Washington was only able to run the ball for 43 yards last night, and starting running back Jonah Coleman carried the ball 11 times for 3 total yards. I know that he was one of the players that we were most concerned with in the roundtable. I saw you got a couple mentions from our Scoop Duck writers. So for Oregon to be able to bottle him up, I think is very encouraging because he's a talented guy. And I think that Lanning said he was the best running back they had faced since Genty earlier on this year. And I mean, he's right there in the thick of the Heisman conversation. So Oregon's defense is doing everything right. I mean, just seeing what they did last night, forcing some turnovers as well. I think that's obviously huge. Those are momentum swings, and yeah, the game was never really in doubt. So I think that with what Oregon put on tape, you got to be proud to get back on the right side of this Washington rivalry.
Yeah, you get the monkey off your back if you're Dan Lanning, right? I mean, leading up to that week, he wasn't going to admit that it irked him about his, last 3 games against Washington, but it did. It did. And this was a way to get that monkey off the back. And I know, his simple answer was to say, the job's not finished yet. You finished 12-0. That's amazing. Like, each week we're watching Alabama get upset or Georgia get upset, or obviously yesterday in the case of Ohio State losing to Michigan. Michigan had like 40 yards passing in the game and won the game. Like, that's terrible. And so, Oregon did have some games that weren't maybe as clean or as dominant as you'd like, but the end result was getting to 12-0. Now you're Dan Lanning. You've got a mostly healthy team. Obviously, you're going to play Penn State. You're looking at your playoff chances are pretty good. 12-0. By the way, signing days in a few days here, 4 or 5 days, 3, 4 days, whatever. I mean, think about the juice that gives you on the recruiting trail. 12-0, beat Ohio State, playing for first year in the Big Ten, and we're already, competing for, the Big Ten championship. So all those things were great. And, for me, just from the Washington game alone, I was happy to see a little bit more of a dominant performance, kind of getting back to that. Okay, there's Oregon. You could tell those couple weeks leading up to the bye, those guys were tired. They were beat up. They just weren't playing at the level we've seen, and it was nice to see last night. Like, yep, the bye week definitely helped them. And you gave a shout out to the offensive line, and I agree. I think that those guys looked a lot more rested up and opened up some really good lanes for both running backs. And just that bye week was big, and it's nice to see Oregon kind of clicking again.
And just to add a little bit more on the offensive line, we didn't see Marcus Harper out there on Saturday night, which was, I think, expected. But Kavika Rogers and Dave Iuli look like they're getting more comfortable each week. I mean, Iuli just plays with a lot of fire. I mean, I was watching him just trying to finish some blocks or push guys, push the pile. So even though you never want an injury to your offensive line, let's be honest, like, these are snaps, these are games that are really going to come in handy for them, not even just next year and, down the line in their Oregon careers, but as Oregon makes a playoff push, because you need as many bodies as you can that you can go play winning football with. And Dan Lanning has told us that a number of times. So I think that that's super important to see that. And how about some of the backups that we got to see, Justin? Dante Moore comes in at quarterback. He had a couple of really nice throws, and he just looked like he was composed and calm. And even though there wasn't like a lot of highlights from him necessarily, just watching his comfort in the pocket and how he can just flick it super easily, that was awesome to see, because that's going to be your quarterback next year, which is so interesting. You finish up the regular season 12-0, you're all excited, all of that stuff, but then it kind of felt like Lanning was like, all right, let me give you a little appetizer of what next year is going to look like. You saw Dink Riggs come in at running back. He looked great. Jeremiah McClellan was in there as well towards the end. So there's so much to be excited about with this team right now, and for them to finish the regular season undefeated is great. I mean, this is the best season that they've had since I've been covering them, of course, and the job's not finished. So you got to take the good and all the accomplishment and just think about that Kobe clip, job's not done. So I think that Lanning's management of all the noise and just having his guys locked in, it's going to be, if it wasn't already, it's going to be put to the test more than it ever has been.
Yeah, no, I would say, obviously, you finished the season 12-0. You're competing for a conference championship. You're the number one team in the country. All those things are great, and beating up on Washington. I think aside from some of those things, my next favorite thing about last night was seeing Dante Moore out there and seeing him run that offense. And it was clean. It was effective. It certainly looks like a guy who, can lead this team if needed. And let's be real. I mean, that's a thing, right? I mean, you saw Ohio State almost lost Will Howard yesterday in their game. He got rocked pretty hard by Michigan. Who's to say down the line that Oregon's not going to count on Dante Moore maybe sometime in these next couple games? That's a big thing to kind of see him out there. I think along with Dante Moore and what he was able to do in the time he had was just seeing that defensive line, man, 10 sacks. I mean, Mateo is a monster. It just like we talked about with Tez Johnson helping the receivers around him. When Jordan Birch is out there, he helps the other guys on the defensive line because, I mean, it's pick your poison, right? Are you blocking Harmon? Are you blocking Caldwell? Are you blocking Mateo? Are you blocking Tuioti? Are you blocking Birch? I don't know. Good luck. Jaden Moore gets out there, gets a big play. Like it's just, that's a nasty group. And so just seeing those guys play like that, and like we're both talking about, most important game of the year is coming up, right? You got to play Penn State for a conference championship. And then when that's done, the next most important of the game will be up, and we'll see what that looks like as well.
Yeah. And you got to come with your best every week. And now Oregon gets to prepare for another game. I'm just trying to think if there's any other kind of lingering thoughts on this game. I mean, what they were able to do to Washington was definitely needed, I think, for a lot of Duck fans. They'd been there were a lot of fans that were ready to get after Washington fans, I think, on Twitter. I think I don't really have anything else to add about the Washington game. I just know that yesterday was one of the most chaotic days in college football. If you were a flag somewhere, you were getting planted at midfield. The fallout from the Ohio State Michigan game was insane. I thought that I don't know if it was Mullins, but some Michigan player was like, he had like the quote of the day for me. It's like, you got to learn how to lose. And that's what he said about Ohio State. And then I saw Norvell grabbing the Florida flag off of off of their midfield. And I think it also happened in UNC, NC State. There was just so much drama, and I don't think a lot of people expected Michigan to. Michigan was like what, a 3-score dog or something like that. Like no 21. One was expecting them to win. Sorry.
Yeah, to win 21 points. No, I would say and I thought about this too. It's a great point. It was nice to see that both Oregon and Washington won or lost with class last night. Obviously, you didn't see any, negative interaction in the post game with either of those teams or any of the players. So, kind of a shout out to both sides there and both coaches for, making sure that everything was everybody was disciplined and did that. So, and I'm not like, oh my God, those guys got in a fight. How dare they? I get it. Emotions are high. You've got lots of testosterone going and energy and I get all that. So it's not like, oh, how dare they? But it was good to see that these two teams that don't care for each other finished the game. Everybody went to the locker room, and that was that. What a fun season it's been covering this team, watching it, the dominant games, the not so dominant games, the Ohio State win, obviously going 12-0, pretty special. And it's going to be really fun to continue covering it for hopefully at least the next few weeks in some of these, conference championships and playoff games and whatnot.
Hey, we'll cover it as long as we possibly can. And that's the cool thing about having a season like this, is that you get to be there for the ups and the downs. Just because they're 12-0, it doesn't mean that there weren't downs. I remember Lanning said last night after the press release, there were people that said we weren't that good, or I can't remember what he was saying, but he was basically acknowledging the people that were saying, I don't know about this team after the first couple of games against Idaho and Boise State. So that's why you got to play the whole season. And Oregon is definitely trending in the right direction after their latest win over Washington. We got a little bit of recruiting to get into as well, Justin. Any final thoughts there? Or are you ready to hop into it?
No. I mean, we covered it all. Great atmosphere, great season. Got to be just super excited about the direction of the program under Coach Lanning, the culture he's building. Like you said, not every win was pretty, but at the end of the day, all that matters is that you're 12-0 and nobody else is. And that's absolutely remarkable. And again, I know we're about to talk recruiting, And that is such a valuable tool for Dan Lanning to now use, because that's really been the only knock on Dan Lanning, is his lack of experience or his lack of winning, even though he's had some good seasons. Now he's having that season where it's like, you guys want to come be part of this? So completely valuable recruiting tool for Dan Lanning moving forward in both the prep recruiting and the transfer portal.
This whole season is a validation of what his formula is and what he's building out there in Eugene. And we're going to get into some recruiting talk here, because Oregon has landed 2 commitments in just as many days. Oregon picks up a commitment from 5-star North Carolina tight end Kendre Harrison on Saturday morning in the hours leading up to that game out of Reidsville, North Carolina. Number 1 tight end in the country. I'm getting up some highlights here on the screen. So give me just a second here, but just a huge addition for Oregon's 2026 class. They were already ranked number 1, and then it's like, hey, why don't you just go ahead and add the number 1 tight end in the country, 6'6", 6'7", 250 pounds, just an absolute game breaker, a guy that can even play outside X receiver potentially. I mean, you can move this guy all over the field, Justin. I think, you get to add to the national recruiting reach that Oregon already had. They've tried to work in North Carolina before, haven't had the most success, but you add a guy like Harrison, and this 2026 class just continues to just absolutely tear up, everyone that they're going after. And he's also a top basketball recruit, so he's going to play hoops for Dana Altman, and it's good times for the Ducks on the recruiting trail right now.
Yeah, I love the fact that this kid plays basketball. I mean, we've seen that in the past, and that's worked out really well for these guys that are super athletes like that. They tend to do well and end up in the NFL more times than not. So, I mean, he's a 5-star. He's the number 1 ranked tight end in the country in his class for a reason. So this dude's just a monster. If you're in the lab and you're creating a tight end, or if you're in Madden or whatever, this is the prototype. This is what you're doing, is this guy right here. So super excited, kind of a, very much like a bigger version of Brock Bowers, which you can just relate to. This kid can get open, can move around. Already looks like Kenyon Sadiq, right? Which is pretty crazy, because Sadiq's a freak of an athlete. So and I think, to your point, to go into North Carolina and do this, that's not been a state where Oregon's had a lot of success in the past. It's really far away from Eugene, in case you didn't know. And so it's kind of nice to break into that state and maybe get things rolling if you're Oregon with Harrison. Gotta love this pickup. I'm going to assume, the next question is going to be, okay, how many more tight ends will they take in 26? I would assume for Oregon, you're probably not taking another tight end unless it's an elite dude. So unless it's Brock Harris or something along those lines. That will depend on who they're able to finish with in 2025, and if they do or don't need to go into the transfer portal. So, I don't think there's an answer to that just yet, but until we get some of these other factors out of the way. But if you're only signing one, this is the one for sure.
I know QB11 had his eval over on ScoopDuck yesterday, and his comp was like a more athletic or more fluid version of Darnell Washington, which is crazy, because that dude was just an absolute freak in the best way of a football player. So this is a great addition too, I think, for Drew Maringer. I think that he's had some good recruiting success at Oregon, but maybe not quite the level of some of his other coaches. And now this is really his marquee win. You got Vanderplug to flip from Washington, which is great. Now you get Kendre Harrison. Lincoln Cure was just on campus over the weekend. Andrew Olesh was on campus over the weekend. I think Brock Harris was on campus over the weekend as well. So tight end recruiting is certainly at the forefront for Oregon right now. But tight end's a premium position, I think. There's just so few that are truly, truly elite. So it makes it that much more important to go out and get a guy like Harrison.
Yeah, and we've seen Oregon likes to use a lot of 12 personnel, obviously having 2 tight ends on the field at a time. And that's great. I think you see that a lot in college football, not just at Oregon. That's kind of the new wrinkle or wave of offense, is a lot of 12 personnel. And it makes sense, because obviously it gives you somebody that can block if you want to run, or somebody that you can send out for a route. And, so now you have to respect both parts of the game with those guys out there. So, and again, there's a lot of tight ends that are either, really athletic and good pass catchers, or there's a lot of guys that are just really good blockers that can move a little bit. this kid does both. So, and he's a freak athlete. So that's a good problem to have.
We got one more commitment to talk about, Justin, as the Ducks got some good news on Sunday morning. 2026 American Fork, Utah, Lone Peak High School defensive lineman Bott Mulitalo announced his commitment to the Ducks. And just another tremendous recruiting win for this staff. Oregon's defensive line haul in 2026 is probably right there with the best of them in the country. I think it's certainly on pace to match what they were able to haul in 2024, as you have Bott Mulitalo, Tony Cumberland, Tamuhini Tapoi, Viliami Mwala, just a bunch of studs. And you get the two best defensive linemen in the state of Utah, and you have, I think, a crucial part of your class. And we're kind of seeing some inside out building here for Dan Lanning and the Ducks as they go into one of their pipeline states to get this latest commitment. Bott was on campus over the weekend as well. I got an interview coming out with him on ScoopDuck later on today. You can try us just for $1. Got to get you 7 days of premium access, by the way. A little plug for the sale. But yeah, this is a guy that's been on Oregon's radar forever. But I know that BYU, Utah, and Washington were some of the other big schools that they had to beat out to get this one done.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at this point, obviously a few days before signing day, but it's pretty clear that this isn't going to be a banner defensive line class for Oregon in 2025, right? I mean, it's just looking like it's few and far between, only the couple commits now. 2026, on the other hand, is completely different. It's closer to what Lanning did in 2024. And that's okay, right? Obviously you want to bring guys in every class, but if you're going to miss one class, at least, bookend it with really good classes. So, like you said, Mulitalo is the fifth defensive line commit for Oregon already, and it's not even 2025 yet. So, great start for Dan Lanning. Obviously, it shows the commitment to getting these defensive line guys. Bott Mulitalo has felt like a guy all along that would quite likely end up at Oregon. He's been to Oregon, I believe, more than any other school. Has always talked supremely positive about the Ducks, and it feels like Oregon was in great shape there all along. So again, you got 9 commits in the class, and 5 of them are defensive linemen, and that's pretty good. That's a good way to start the class. So that'll give Lanning and his staff a lot of room to be able to go after the skill position guys moving forward.
And there are some big names at the skill positions. I think that Chris Henry Jr. is probably the biggest one that comes to mind, the Ohio State wide receiver commit in the 2026 class out of Mater Dei. But Oregon's picking up some great momentum. Sure, these are 2026 commits, Justin, but to get any kind of commit heading into the early signing period, I think is only going to help you if you're Oregon. So we're going to be back, I think, on Tuesday, probably for another heavy recruiting focused episode as the Ducks get closer to the early signing period on Wednesday. And Justin and I are going to have all your coverage over at ScoopDuck.com. You can try us out, like I said, for $1 right now during our flash sale. Silly season, Big Ten championship. We're going to have all of it covered for you. So it's a great time to be following the Ducks. Great time to be following Justin and myself. But any final thoughts, Justin, before we get out of here?
Yeah, one final thought, and I genuinely feel bad that we're not able to spend much time talking about it. But shout out to Oregon men's basketball for the big win over Alabama yesterday, winning the Players Era tournament. I believe it was the first year of that new little mini tournament, and that was a big win over Alabama. That was I believe, the number 9 team heading into that one in the country. And Nate Biddle with the last minute push in bucket. It was a really nice way to finish off a really good Saturday. Obviously, Oregon gets a 5-star commit. Oregon goes out there and blasts your rival and goes 12-0 on the season. And I got back to my tailgate just in time to watch most of that fourth quarter of that men's basketball game, and what proved to be a really good game. So I know we'll talk plenty about basketball in the future, but at least we gave them a shout out for a really big win and still undefeated on the season.
There you go. Yeah, they're having a great start to the year. Dana Altman and the Ducks are tearing it up on the hardwood. But that'll do it for us on another episode of the pod. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him at JHopkinsSD. Find me anywhere at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck on 3 YouTube channel and check us out at ScoopDuck.com. Subscribe to us to get all of our premium content at the best time. There's no better time. But until next time, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.